Greetings, everyone. This is Richard Solomon, taking care of business. Welcome to the show. This week, we're going to be talking about cars, the great American passion, cars, with our guest expert, Kafir Barzilai. And he is with a company called Carsity, C-A-R-S-I-T-Y. So if you're checking out on the internet, it's carsity.com, 844-CAR-S-I-T-Y. All right, welcome to the show. Let's get right into it. What if you're a consumer, a driver out there? What are some of the secrets that the consumers don't really know that should be made aware of? I remember I had a friend, Jeff, and he used to tell me, when you go to the dealership, don't let them take you into the back room because that's where that's where they work you over and make all the money. So that was and he was a service writer for an auto leasing company, and he said, don't go there. It's always bad news. You know, and he said all the things they need to sell you, you know, back in the day, you know, undercoating and pinstriping and, you know, the better story.
We're still in the 80s with that.
Yeah, he said, don't do that. That's bad news. So to update that information and get us into the 21st century, what are those like inside secrets that people don't know but should know and are going to learn today in this radio and YouTube broadcast?
Well, first, Rich, thank you for bringing me on the show.
You're a friend of the show.
It's only been 100 years, like you said.
Exactly.
Right. You know, the secrets. There are no secrets, Rich. They're real.
What are the realities
out there?
What are the realities?
The reality of it is, you know, every car owner comes in a different form. You know, some lease, some own, some finance, some Uber today. You know, so it really comes in different form. The real thing is just to know what you want to use a car for. If you know what you want to use a car for, then you'll know how to save the most amount of money. If we're talking about saving money, and if we're not talking about saving money, then you know, I don't think the secrets apply, right?
Well, I'm going to assume that most of the people out there are looking to save a few dollars, because even the rich, you know, have needs. Right. No,
so, the truth is the rich like to save the most money, you know?
Right.
But like I said, you know, if you're leasing a car, I guess leasing a car today, you don't have to go to the dealership, so you don't have to, you know, to get into all the, you know, upsales of a dealership. You could just go to a leasing company and, you know, save a few bucks that way. Plenty of leasing companies here in the New York area and the northeastern region, you know.
Now, I didn't know that. I thought you had to go to a dealer to get a brand new car. So you're telling me I can call up a leasing company and just go straight to them and they can lease me a car?
Right. They really act as brokers. You know, they're like independents who, you know, want to sell cars but don't want to work for the dealerships, and you know they pay for the car. They pay for cars cheaper than what you'd pay for a dealership because you'd pay at a dealership because you're a consumer. When you walk into a dealership, they identify you, profile you as a consumer, and they sell you the car based on an MSRP price. When a leasing company gets a car, he gets it based on the invoice price. And those two prices might differ by 10% or so, just as a random figure, and that would reflect on your monthly payments if you're, you know, on a lease of a car. So through a leasing company, you can get a car cheaper than you can if you went to a dealership.
Okay, now
you know, that's a secret, I think, because I hear all the time, you know, people saying, "What? I can go to a leasing. I don't have to go to a dealership to get my car." Not necessarily. You know, I don't know how those things will change over time, but right now, secret one.
Are there advantages? What are the advantages and disadvantages of going to a dealer for the initial time to purchase?
Some people really like the experience of going to a dealership, and I think the dealerships are trying to do that. Dealerships have nice waiting areas. They give you big TVs. They give you coffee. They have service. Some people feel that, if they marry the dealership, they'll get better service. In some instances that might be. You might be buying at a dealership and working with one of the top sales managers who introduces you to the service manager who you have a relationship with, and it just gives you a good experience when you're there. Whereas if you leased it if you got it at a leasing company, they might have delivered that car to your door and you never met anyone at the dealership.
I'll never forget the famous commercial. I forgot who it was for, and I probably wouldn't mention them anyway. But I remember it's like, how do they treat you before you buy or lease the car? And somebody in a little waiter jacket goes, "Excuse me, Mr. Solomon, but would you like a little bit of demi-tassy?" And then after you've made your purchase, they're like, "What do you want?" Or wait in line.
The experience, the general experience, and I know that there are listeners out there, but and everyone's probably, the majority are thinking the same thing. The most people don't have good experiences at dealerships. Generally speaking, buying a car, it's not a good experience. You're trying to buy a car. It's not like going to, Macy's to buy a polo shirt. You got 3 colors, a couple of sizes. You want a tight, slim fit, loose, and you're out the door. Here you got, you want an SUV. You got 50 SUVs to choose from. You're going to pay $700 a month. You're going to pay $650. You're going to stretch it and go for $850. What do I do and why?
Well, the thing is,
and that's the toughest decision today, buying a car. So it's always a bad experience. And no matter, if you're not a quick decision maker and, sometimes willing to, just walk away with what you got, obviously you want to pay a nominal price for a car, whether you're owning it, financing it, leasing it, whatever it may be. But, you want to feel like you got a good deal.
I know that there's a wisdom out there that says something like the most expensive purchase you'll ever make in your life is your home. But the second most expensive purchase of a physical item, like a college education, but a physical item, is your car. Because
you are so right, Rich.
And that puts so much pressure on you in a way, because it's like, wow. So a home, well, that's a big, big decision, but you only make that once in a while. But cars, God forbid you're in an accident, you need a new car, or your car has mechanical failure and, it's just seen its last day, and all of a sudden now you need a new car. And you can't really exist for long periods of time without a car, and it doesn't make a lot of economic sense to go to a car rental company and have these, long-term rentals until you decide. So there's a lot of pressure, isn't there not? A lot of pressure to.
I really like the way you spell it out. There is definitely an inherent cost in owning a car, and the way you say it, it's the second most expensive item. Sounds pretty much in line with the banks have a love affair with 2 items here in America, and that's property and cars. It's your house and your second most expensive item. Because
nobody's mortgaging the polo shirt.
And if the banks are there, that's where the money's at. That's where people are spending money. If I mean, I'm just thinking of the numbers just based on the way you spelled it out like that before. If you own a $600,000 house today, you could be leasing, a $70,000-$80,000 car today with the values I have. An S-Class today. An S-Class 15 years ago was, $70,000, $80,000. Your top-of-the-line model. S-Class today, top-of-the-line model, might cost you close to $200,000. It's ridiculous. But, you lease one of those cars every 3 years. 9 years, you see the value of your house. It might be the most expensive item.
Right. Well,
you actually hold the note for the car for the time that you have it. But, again, it's the way we break it down. If you're leasing a car, it might cost you less, and that's what people have to understand. Do they really want to buy a car?
Well, let's go through that. What is the advantage of buying? What is the advantage of leasing? And what is the advantage of financing? From the consumer point of view.
The financing, has to be leveraged properly. It's a depreciating asset. You know, you want to finance something that appreciates, then you have no problem. You know, you could take that, you could pay the note off in 5 years. You have an appreciating asset, you'll have value there. But what if your asset depreciates below the point that you owe? You're in trouble. You're underwater.
Like being underwater, exactly. Because what we see in mortgages, for example, in homes, is you bought the house for $500,000. You lived in it for 10 years, and now because of current economics or whatever, now it's worth $350,000. Whereas the older model in people's minds were, you know what? I'll buy a house for $500,000. I'll live in it for 10 years, and then you know what? I'll sell it for $700,000. So I'll make $200,000 over the 10 years. So no matter what I paid, I'll actually make some money and walk away with some.
Exactly.
But
you know,
that doesn't work anymore.
And it's easy. It's easy to say, okay, 4%, 6%. You know, I'm still ahead of the game 10 years later. But here, even at 0%, you could be underwater.
Right. And
that's a dangerous game to play when you're holding these notes. Now, the biggest problem in the economic structure, or where this falls, is that you have these young students that are taking these loans on cars that find themselves underwater, you know, taking a loan out and not depreciate. They should really regulate that, you know. Either way,
what's the most important?
Either way, you're in a bad situation. You know,
look, when you're young,
sorry.
No, when you're young, what's the one thing you want to get? You know, you want to get a car.
You know, I hear so many different things. You know, I hear. I remember growing up. You know, should we discuss age on the show?
Why not?
But 20 years ago, I was 20. So, you know, I remember growing up when I was in my teens. You know, everybody couldn't wait to get their first car. You know, I think today it might be a little different. You know, people, you know, there are more reasons to stay home and not do anything altogether. You know, with the TVs and the apps and stuff like that. But
and the high cost of rent.
I think I hear that there are probably less young people get out there. First of all, even going out and getting their licenses at 16 when it's the first time that they can actually go and get it, and that have the desire to even get a car if it's necessary. Whereas when we were growing up, you couldn't care no matter what. You turned 16, you couldn't wait to get your hands on $2,000-$3,000 so you can go buy yourself that Monte Carlo. You know.
Well, the other thing is this: in those days, the cost of acquisition between a used car and the insurance wasn't killer, whereas now it's like, you know, the amount of insurance.
The cost of owning anything today is ridiculous.
Right, like even a modest level car is not, you know, $1,000, you know, and certainly the insurance is, you know, if you're on a policy, I think, you know, you could be spending, if you got a decent coverage, you know, it would be out of the question to say that you're, as a brand new under 25-year-old driver with you know, a fairly decent car, they could be charging anywhere between $300 and $3,500.
You know, I think it's all relative, though. You know, if you're living in rural areas where you need a car, and then where if you're living in, you know, populated areas where, you know, everything you do is within 3 square miles, like New York City, maybe the point of owning a car is just not there anymore. But still, people do it because they enjoy driving a car, and I enjoy driving a car myself. You know, I enjoy the technology, the new cars, the way they're being built today. But there are definitely differences in, you know, owning cars. You know, if you need a car just to get around from point A to point B, you know, a smart thing might be just to lease it. You know, after 3 years you give it back. You're going to get a depreciating asset regardless. You know, so you're going to wind up losing money. Whether you buy the car or finance it or lease it, either way, it's going to cost you to own the car. But the cost of owning the car and the liability of the note itself, by owning a car, you assume all the risks. Some damage happens to that car, you own it, you're taking a hit.
All right.
If it's a lease, your car is insured regardless. Insurance might cover it, but you don't take the hit. You don't own the note on the car. You give it back. In a city, I think that's the smartest thing to do. Now, if you want to buy a car and own it forever, and I think there are still people out there that do that, I don't know what demographic that is exactly, but some people come and they think they want to buy a car and own it forever. You have to try to understand what the value of that car might be in 5 or 10 years from now, because that's what you assume to hold it for. And if it makes sense to pay, if you go forward, it's 5,000%. But if you care to pay $20,000 for something that's going to be worth $3,000 in 10 years from now,
right? All right. This is Richard Solomon. I will be right back. Keep it locked in on Taking Care of Business. We'll be right back. What I really need, some kind of affection. Welcome back. This is Richard Solomon with my guest, Kafir Barzilai. And he is an expert on the automotive industry, and specifically, he's a car buyer. So we were talking before the break about sort of the nuances between buying, leasing, and financing a car. So let's go pick up where we left off. What would you like to add to what we were kind of talking about in segment number 1?
Well, thanks for calling me an expert. I don't know how much of an expert I am.
You buy a lot of cars?
I do buy a lot of cars.
You drive a lot of cars?
I really don't think there's an expert in this. When you're a consumer, you just have to assume what's right, and I think that's what consumers have the hardest time getting over. They don't know what's right.
Well, it's that uncertainty in a very volatile
It's that uncertainty,
market.
and then who hurts the most from that? It's the guy that's really trying to do good for you. You might find a leasing company or a dealership, or if you're out there in the market for a used car, you might go to a used car lot, which is not the same experience, obviously, as a leasing company, because they're leasing brand new cars. So you're always going to get that smell of fresh leather when your car gets delivered. Or you go to a dealership, where even if you're buying a used car, they give you a fresh waiting room. So there's an experience there.
And a little bit of Debbie Tassie. That, for those who just joined us, that was a joke that started in the first segment.
Right.
When do you want to? You're talking about driving a car into the ground, and that there's some people who say, "All right, I'm going to buy a car, but I'm going to drive it to the ground.
Own it for 10 years,
or until it dies.
Right.
But at what point? And I guess it's hard to answer this. But at what point do you say to yourself, I'm putting in X dollars a month, a year to maintain this, and it's beginning to kill me? Because you see that. You talk to your friends, it's like, oh my God, I just had to put a transmission. Now this is shot. Oh, and then after the drivetrain was a problem, and now I need a new muffler. The muffler rotted out, and I need that. And at some point, you paid $30,000 for the car. You drove it for 10 years, and you did normal maintenance, but now you're beginning to almost rebuild the car. And there are some people who don't necessarily want to. They
wind up paying triple in the rebuild.
Right. So how do you convince those people when to pull the plug? And then of course nobody wants to have to buy a car under pressure. So I think that's the whole tipping point balance thing, which is, you keep sinking money thinking, well, this will be the last big expense, but
right.
You're only as good as your weakest part.
Right. I'm not in the retail business, so I can't. I wouldn't tell you what the consumer experience is like, because I'm not involved. But I think the smartest thing for them to know is what they want to do, and that really is the smartest thing. If they're out there to lease a car, or finance it, or purchase it, they probably have to do three different things. But relative to the person who wants to own a car for 10 years, I think what they have to understand is that buying a brand new car, which unfortunately I see a lot of people doing, they buy a brand new car, want to hold it for 10 years, and those cars have the worst depreciation. Even if you bought that car a year old, it'll lose much less value because it already lost its initial value that first year that you didn't own it.
Well,
so,
what is the expression?
And that's where you save money. You know, what they should probably have is like a really, really good questionnaire. And this is where I say that I'm not, relevant to the retail. It's very hard for me to gauge, what a customer, what the best way to tailor a customer into a deal, because he might have a trade that he comes in with and a car that he's looking to come out with. So what he has to know is how to really convert his old car, whether it's financed, leased, or owned, into something else that he wants to buy. Now, he might have negative equity. He might have positive equity. And I've seen people that own cars and want to get into leasing. So they sell their old car that they might have owned for a period of 5 years, might have been a used car. You get all the money up front, and you go out there and you lease a car for $300 a month, and you realize, hey, 10 years later, I'm spending, $3,000-$4,000 a month to own a car, but I lost the same amount by owning it.
Well,
here I have a brand new car.
Well, one of the things that my friend Jeff taught me, who is unfortunately no longer with us, but one of the things, but he really knew the car industry. We grew up together, and he used to always say to me all kinds of things. But he used to say, a car is generally warranted for the first 3 years, and a lease is generally a 3-year lease. So you really want to get into 3-year leases because that's when the car is the most warranted and will have the least amount of repairs. And then if you just keep going through that cycle of just getting a new car every 3 years, you'll always be having a car under warranty with the least risk of, a horrific breakdown and things like that. And that kind of made sense to me. But at what point, from your experience, do you see like the car sort of really drop? Is it like 5 years? At what point do you see, after the first year, which is the first, I think, there's an expression, as soon as you drive out the door of the dealership, you take $2,000 off the car in the first, minute.
Oh, probably more than that. I've seen situations where people have, taken cars from brand new out of a dealership and then realize they're not comfortable with the way the seat feels. They come back to the dealership and he can't take it back for what they paid for it.
Right. So that's the first.
That's depreciation right there.
Right. So that's the first big drop. But when is
reality?
When is the second big drop?
The car industry. The car itself is a financial. It's almost like a financial instrument. It moves. Some cars can actually appreciate. Classic cars appreciate. So people actually do use them as a financial instrument to increase their net worth. But for the most part, a brand new car depreciates, and it all depends on the way you maintain your car. But a 2014 Acura MDX with no miles on it, standing next to a 2015 Acura MDX with no miles on it, will be $3,000-$4,000 less. And that's something that's just set in the structure of the way cars depreciate. There's always a depreciation point of the car. And I think, I can't tell you when, if it happens in the beginning or at the end. It happens throughout the lifespan of the car. And if you maintain that car forever, the depreciation can be a lot less over many more years.
How reliable are these guides. I don't want to use anybody's specific name, but the guide to pricing of vehicles. Are they good? Are they more of a yardstick, or are they more of the Bible?
I think the most people go by. There are plenty of guides out there. There are real value guides that are more relative to the wholesale market, which is what you'll really get for your car today. And then there are guides that are retail based, but that's only asking prices. And I think a lot of people, and I don't want to mention names, but there are more popular ones online that people go by, and that's not necessarily what the value of the car is. It's what someone's willing to pay you for that car today. I mean, not like it's art. There's obviously a market for the car because when it was produced, they produced 100,000 of them. So you know what people will pay for that car in an auction setting, for example. And that's what the real value of the car is. It's not what it goes for on the lot. And there are indexes online that try to guide people based on what people are asking, what dealers are asking for the car. And that's not really always a yardstick right there.
Let's jump around a little bit, because in this radio show, that's what we do. We always jump around. Tell me, have you been to car auctions?
Yes, I have.
What are they like? Are they cars being sold one at a time? Do you walk around a lot and kick the tires, or are they sold in big lots of here's 100 cars? What do we get for them? What's it really like?
First of all, it's a dealer-based auction. The auctions that I go to are dealer-based. Only dealers buy cars, only dealers sell cars. I think there used to be a time where people can actually, consumers can actually get into these auctions. They really started regulating that a lot more. But that's that's an open trade market right there. You put 10 Honda Odysseys back to back with Honda dealers in, that are in that area that are bidding on those cars, based on its value from the day that it was priced, which is your invoice or MSRP. It has its depreciation, and dealers will vie and bid for those cars, and at one point, someone knows what he's willing to pay for that car, to put on his lot. So it's the auction setting is like I said, dealer based, and that's what really drives the price of cars out there. It's what the dealers are willing to pay for them.
Why would a new car dealer want to buy used cars? Because aren't you competing with yourself in a way?
Cars over time change in condition, change in miles. They have different color cars, and there is something that's out there that's called a desirability index. Someone might want a white car over a blue car. A 2012 Honda Odyssey with 20,000 miles might go for $25,000. But if you find one with 50,000 miles, you might be able to pick it up for $18,000 because of its diminished value. So dealers go out there and buy cars just to be able to, sell cars at different price points.
Okay, and I guess
so it's
also
not really to compete with themselves. It's really to, fill the, serve the marketplace.
So if you were to talk to somebody who's like a college graduate, would you advise them to buy like a car that was more or less about a year old, so that they would get the newest used car possible at the best price?
No, the smartest thing to do is ask your parents to buy you a car. That's the smartest thing to do. You see, there you go. You spend less, and that's the trick. The trick is trying to learn how to spend less. But
that's a good answer.
You were talking before about driving prices of cars down, or buying a car and owning it till it's worth nothing. Certain cars have already depreciated. They're 7-8 years old. Their MSRP prices might have been $30,000, $40,000. These cars might sell for $6,000 or $7,000 today. Different cars have different depreciation because there's different demand and different cars are made differently. One car might be made better than the other. That'll hold its value over time, and the market drives that price because, again, the desirability, what people want, what people are willing to pay for that car. So you might have cars that were, you might have a car that was MSRP $30,000 versus a car that was MSRP $40,000. 5 years later, the $30,000 is worth more than the $40,000. How did that happen?
How did that
Appreciation,
happen?
desirability.
Okay. So
all right.
Let me ask you, in this realm of questioning, what about cars, like we know that certain car manufacturers have disappeared. The Edsel, I don't want to talk about anybody new, but
yeah, find me one.
So some certain cars have, are no longer made. So in the used car market, I know they say pre-owned, but I think that's just a big fancy, marketing gimmick. The used car market, is there any true desirability for a car that's no longer backed up by a manufacturing company that builds newer models of what is no longer built?
I'm sure that's, that it's arguable, but I would say that it's probably Honda, Toyota. These cars really keep up.
Right. So
you find these cars on the road with, 150, 200,000 miles, and their engines are still strong. A Lexus might have to go, get a new transmission after 150,000 miles, but that's normal. Versus, some cars that might, kick in after 60 or 70,000 miles. But I think, specific cars do hold their value better. But again, when you're buying a car that's already used and has already depreciated, it might lose a lot less over time. And I think that's the smartest thing. In fact, I just want to answer that question for college students that might really be out there to buy cars and don't want to find themselves in situations where they took a loan on a car and find themselves on the water. I mean, they get nothing after 3 years. At least, the $15,000 they spent for school, they have an education when they're done, albeit didn't use it while you were in school because you financed the car. But the smartest thing to do is probably buy a car that's already depreciated. So you find yourself, like a 2003 Honda that might run you $5,000 or $6,000 if you could afford it. But after 3 years, you might, get $3,500. So what'd that car cost you?
$1,500
over 3 years.
Yeah, which is a deal. So before we go to our break, which is in 2 more minutes, can you lease a used car? And if you can, is it fairly accessible?
Yeah, that is a very good question. I definitely have an answer for that, and it's quite intense. And the immediate answer is yes and no. Yes, probably on the West Coast because I think there's a company that does it, and no, because you won't find it here. So I think for our listeners, that's the relevant answer. But the answer to that, the technical answer to that, is that in order to lease, not own, so you don't hold the note. So I mean, some other entity is holding that note. In order to lease a used car, you must have an entity or a company, a business an entity that's in business to lease those cars. So they hold the notes, and you technically finance it or lease it from them. And you'd have to have a company that would that's willing to take that risk and hold the note on used cars that consumers would lease. So there used to be a company that was doing that. Forgot their name off the top of my head, but no longer. So the immediate answer to that is I don't think you'll find one.
And I assume the dealers don't lease used cars to you.
No, because there has to be someone that's willing to hold the note on that car over a 3-year period. In other words, that business would buy that car, lease it to you, and then have to dispose of it after 3 years, not losing their shirt on the car, where the lease was able to cover the depreciation and put some money in their pocket.
Gotcha.
So it's a whole, Honda does it, Honda Finance and Toyota Finance, because they do it for their own cars.
Now, do dealers mostly make their money now on service?
I have a couple of dealer friends, and I think the answer to that is yes, because the consumer knowledge has pretty much taken away the negotiation of sales. They know what the price of cars are out there, and they go in saying, this is what I want to pay. I'm not going to pay that. So I think that's where most of these dealerships lean towards, more service-based businesses. Dealerships do make money off of service, and sometimes the service does better than the new car store itself.
All right. All right. With that, we're going to take a quick break. This is Richard Solomon. The show is Taking Care of Business. You can catch us at TCBRadio.com. We are also on YouTube if you search under TCBRadioWCWP. We'll be right back. We're talking with Kafir from Carsity, Carsity, Carsity.com, 844-CAR-SITY. We'll be right back.
What I really need, some kind of affection.
Richard Solomon, welcome you back to Taking Care of Business. All right, so this is Kafir Barzaleh, and he's with Carsity, but he's also with All Auto Buyer. So, for my sake, what's the difference? All these different hats that you wear, what's the differences between all these companies, and what does that mean to both consumers and wholesalers out there?
It's one hat. It's definitely one hat.
Is it a big hat?
Right. It's a 10-gallon Texas cowboy hat. No, it's I'm a buyer, and we have our online venue for consumers to reach us. It's at Carsity.com. Carsity came from varsity, university. The knowledge of cars. It's kind of like the idea that we came with it, and that's hopefully what people use us for. Is just to gain knowledge. We're buyers, and we understand that you might go to a dealer, you might come trade your car with us directly. So that's the consumer web point that people find us on. But we're trade buyers with dealers, and we work. We basically buy the trades that you might go to a dealer and trade your car. So you trade your car at a dealer, and you might go to a Mercedes store and trade your old Toyota. Mercedes store might not have a market for that Toyota, so they'll call a trade buyer like myself and say, "Hey, Kay, you want to buy this car? You want to trade this car?" And that's what I do.
Cool. Now, so let's get into the last important segment, which is I got a car and I'm choking because it's either a big payment or my financial circumstances have changed, or you know what, I just moved and parking's now extraordinarily expensive and I can take mass transit now, and I need to not have that car for whatever reason. I'm chronically late. It's hurting my credit. It's not in my budget anymore, given a change in circumstances, whatever it is. What do they need to know about you, and what do you need to know about them so that it's a square deal?
Well, again, if you're leasing a car and you currently own a lease in a car, sometimes you might have equity in that lease and you don't know it. So it's always good that when you're trading a car, maybe to find us online, reach out to us, and just tell us what car you're currently leasing. I'll ask you a couple of questions, and we might be able to determine if there's value in that car. If there is, you might be able to trade that car in, even though you lease it, but walk away with a couple of bucks in your pocket. So that's one thing to know. If you're financing a car, I think finances are probably one of the worst, credit things to get into. It's one of the worst ways to sign your name on a piece of paper. Again, because it's the depreciating asset, right?
Right.
So, sometimes you might be underwater, but that car continues to depreciate and you continue to pay it off. And you know what I say? Stop the hemorrhaging. That's a situation that could turn into a worse situation. So you might be underwater by a couple of $1,000s, maybe more than that. But, at one point, you're either going to pay that car off completely and you're going to still have that that loss incurred in the car, paying all that interest over the next few years that you think you're going to pay it off. I say, smartest thing to do is get out of that car and probably try to get yourself into, a lease, or maybe you don't need a car, like you said, as often as you do, and maybe you just need to rent a car from time to time.
Right.
But I say, I love cars. I think it's the best way to get around. Keep buying.
Have you basically driven every kind of car there is?
Oh, I haven't driven not every car.
Well, I mean, most of the.
I haven't driven a Bugatti yet.
Right, but you've
It's
driven
like
most.
a $1.6 million car.
Right, but you've driven most of the cars that all of our listeners pretty much have drive or own or buy or lease, more or
Right.
less. The standards. What is your current thing about what's out there as far as cars, car safety, performance, and value? Just generally, not without identifying. More like a trend. What do you see?
There's a lot of new technology out there. It's amazing. It really is amazing what they're doing with cars today, and the technology that they're putting into cars. You got your blind spot detectors, you got parking sensors, you have lane departure warning, you have Distronic cruise control, which monitors the speed of your car. If there's a car in front of you, it'll slow down. You have, you're going into the autonomous world of cars these days. So the car's going to pretty much do everything for you. It detects an accident 3 cars ahead and stops for you without you doing anything. And I think it's pretty cool stuff. It's autonomy in some ways, but when you're driving in a car and it can do all that stuff for you, Star Trek is here.
Well, it's kind of interesting. Like if you look at the newer cars, you see like the Bluetooth, the USB port. It was interesting. I actually took just a memory the other day. I was in somebody else's car, and I took a memory stick of a radio show, and just put that in the USB port, and magically it played the show that we produced, and we were listening to the raw copy. And I'm like, wow, you didn't, in the old days you needed to transfer it and burn it to a CD and then put it into the CD player and all the other stuff. Now you're able to take just a zip key, a thumb drive, USB key, and just stick it right in the car, and it's like, wow, you're there.
I remember in 2000, somewhere in mid-2000s, they came out with, there was like Bluetooth radio, and someone in the car took his phone and played something, and it was like on the speakers, and you're like, wow,
I remember when I was a little...
that technology is so common today in cars. I think, not to mention specific car manufacturers, because they're, pretty much all car manufacturers have their A-list vehicles where they try to put every single new thing out there, but, then you have like Cadillac and Mercedes, which are supposed to be the creme de la creme of cars, that are always pushing the envelope, and that's where you see the latest gadgets, the safety features are the coolest things, stuff that keeps you in the lane or detects when when someone's in your blind spot. I'm sure that saves people from a couple of accidents. So technology is pretty cool in cars today. I think that's one of the things that's driving the market.
When I was a little kid, I remember my uncle had I was really small. I remember my uncle had a Lincoln Continental Mark IV, and he had an 8-track player.
How cool was that?
And I'm pretty sure Elvis was the tape, or Sinatra, whatever, or he had both. I don't know. When I post this on YouTube and someone listens to this 20 years from now, what will they be laughing about when we're talking about today's current technology? Because it's going to be more like a Jetsons car. What are they?
Right, that's what I was going to say. What, they had wheels? I think Goodyear's probably going to make jet propulsion engines. So, no more tires. Right?
Where do you see the car evolving? How do you see the car evolving?
I think that the car probably did not evolve to our expectations from what we expected, let's say 30 years ago. 30 years ago, you just thought in 2000 everyone's going to be flying, you know. I think in, 10, 15 years from now, there's going to still be rubber on the road. Maybe a little bit more autonomy. I think they might install some more features on the road itself. I think it's all about detection and location. If a vehicle could detect where it is and what it's doing, they might have cars that really can get you from point A to point B without you doing much. But it's your car, it's your ride.
Well,
That's one way. That's one thing might happen.
Think of how cool it would be to wake up in the morning and you're really exhausted. The kids kept you up, you had to work late, whatever it is, and then you fall into the back seat of your car, you take a nap, and your car automatically drives you to the office.
Right. They make cars with coolers today. What's to say they won't have cars in 15 years from now that makes just the exact right, cup of coffee you want. Right,
you have a bed for a nap.
Right.
The one trend I've noticed is that the traffic has just become so congested everywhere lately. What used to be easy, quick local rides have become much more complicated. I see much more bumper to bumper. I see weekends being as heavy as weekdays. Do you see that? And do you see any future in which cars will somehow figure out through technology more bypassing and more consolidation of drivers?
Well, that's being done already by stuff like Google Maps and stuff like that. They tells you current traffic, and if I think more young people. This is one thing I'd like to discuss here. I'll open up a topic for you. I think the younger generation, the 20-year-olds today, are using their maps to, go to local venues in their area. Nobody knows how to get there anymore.
Right. Well,
everyone's just using the maps. So I think that's one way to, circumvent traffic, because the map will tell you the shortest way to get there.
Well, what's interesting is, in the old days, you actually took out you pulled out a physical map, you tried to figure out where you were.
Right.
And
or you knew your neighborhood.
Right.
Today I see young people don't even know their own neighborhood.
Right. And also people move around a lot more now, too. So they're not really from anywhere in particular. What else do you see on the horizon?
Well, I like classic cars.
Let's talk about that. What
classic cars have done in the last 10 years.
Is there a big market for the classic cars?
One of the things I love about cars is the lust that people have for them. Some of them are really, really beautiful works of art, and some of them are rare. There's an inherent cost in owning any car, but some cars actually appreciate in value.
It's funny. I have a friend, Steve, and what he does for fun is he likes to work at nights and weekends in his garage, and he restores like 1930s Fords. And the amount of labor is unbelievable, but what's interesting is when he kind of finishes them, it's like a new old car, but you really see how different it is, with the big wheels, the big chrome, sort of the big headlights, the fact that they're not really fast. I mean, they're big, heavy cars. They're solid cars, but they're certainly, I guess they reflect a different level of technology and driving.
I think every demographic has a different view on classic cars. Not taking into account the younger generation, but if you're 40s, you're probably like 80s cars, and if you're 60, you're probably like 60s and 70s cars, and if you're 80s, you like stuff from the 20s, So I think it's all relative.
Well, what old cars do you like?
I don't know much about those 30s cars, but I like Porsches, and Porsches have done phenomenally well. Some of the Porsches have tripled in price in the last 10 years.
I've gone upstate, And I've been to some of the, the car shows where they have them on like farms or open areas.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
they have them all displayed with the hood open, and you see everything, things, cars that had, skirts, they called them, which were these things that are on the back wheels that kind of covered the wheel well. Wings, which is sort of like a little window to open up on the side. Rumble seats, which was kind of a really wild concept that you sat outside the car, sort of.
Right.
In some ways, the cars were thinner than they are now. They were certainly more fragile, but then again, there weren't as many cars on the road.
I don't have such a vast knowledge of the classic car industry, and be that as I may, I own a couple myself. But there's definitely value there. The longer we go in time, the more rare these cars become, harder they are to find, and they really are, some of them like works of art.
The classic cars that you own, you don't need to share anything in particular, but what was it about those cars? Is it the car that you want to drive on a Sunday in the afternoon on the open road to have something kind of just fun and different? Was it more like that, or was it more like, wow, this is when driving?
That's exactly it. It's cars have wow factors. Even if you're Rich Solomon and you've leased 3 Honda Accords back to back over the last 10 years, even he sees a car sometimes and says, "Wow,"
Well, my favorite is like you see a guy in like a 1940s Ford or Chevy or 50s car, with the dice in the window, and everything.
Right.
And you can't help but going up to a traffic light when you stop rolling down your window, go, "Hey, that's a cool car."
Exactly. Exactly. And those wow factor cars are the ones that people desire. It's hard for me to explain exactly why a Porsche would be would increase more in value over a Ferrari. Even though they're both classic cars. Again, I don't have that classic car knowledge, but some of them have air-cooled engines, and they only made that through a specific time frame, and that's what people desire, and that's why one Porsche might double and triple in value over time, whereas another one might just flatline or kind of just flat out.
Wow. All right, so that's all we got. So, folks, thank you for listening. That was our show on cars and car buying and car trends and wow and fuzzy dice and a little bit of demi-tasse. So I'd like to thank Kfir for being with us. If you want to get him, it's carsity.com, 844-CAR-SITY. Or if you're a wholesaler or in the trade rather, allautobuyer.com, and call them with your car questions. Thank you for lending us all your expertise and your valuable time. And I guess Kfir and I will see you on the road until next week. So thanks for listening.
Thank you very much.
And drive safely. Thanks again.
Whoa.